I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, your home for deer hunting news, stories, and strategies. And now, your host, Mark Kenyon.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kenyon. This is episode number 190. And today in the show, we are joined by Joe Hamilton, a wildlife biologist and the founder of the Quality Deer Management Association. And we are going to be chatting with him about conservation, the QDMA, hunting in the South, and much, much more. All right, welcome to another episode of the Wired to Hunt podcast, brought to you by Sitka Gear. And today, here in a little bit, we're going to be joined by Joe Hamilton. And Joe is the founder of the Quality Deer Management Association. So he is just a wealth of information. He has a lot of interesting insight into kind of the evolution of the hunting world. So there's going to be a lot of interesting things to talk about when it comes to that. I want to talk to him a little bit about, hunting and what we've got going on this month here in December. And he's going to have an interesting perspective there too, because he's down in South Carolina. We don't talk to as many people as we probably should about hunting down in the South, so I want to cover that. But then maybe just as important as all of that is the fact that Joe is just a great storyteller. I went down to get my Deer Steward certification down in Missouri maybe 6 or 7 years ago. It's this course that the Quality Deer Management Association puts on. It's a 2-day event, and Joe was down there for that. And I just remember sitting there and just being like captivated whenever he talked. He just has that voice and that presence that just kind of sucks you in, and you just want to listen to the guy. So I'm excited just to listen to the guy today. And he actually has a new book out with many of his stories that I think is going to be pretty cool too. So we'll talk about all those things. But before we do that, before we get to the good storyteller, we need to take a few minutes for some bad storytellers. Me and Dan, with our weekly preamble. Do you have any bad stories, Dan, that we should cover today?
Oh, dude. I was a hardcore drinker for like 10 years. Of course I got bad stories.
Maybe not those stories.
Oh, okay. All right. I tell you what. We often talk a little bit about social media greed, antler greed, and stuff like that.
Facebook envy, all that.
Yeah, Facebook envy. Man, I got it.
You did?
I got it today.
How'd that happen?
It's like...
You got a field tag.
I got a field tag.
What are you getting?
But guess what? The guy who shares the farm with me, I saw a picture of the buck that he shot.
Oh,
and
no.
Do you remember the buck that I showed you at the beginning of the year? The big 8 with the split G2?
Is that the one that you missed?
No, that's the bigger one of the 8s.
Oh, okay. So, but still, a giant 8-pointer. Yeah.
Giant 8-pointer. He ended up shooting it during shotgun season.
Oh.
And I just was like, I had this mix of emotion of, awesome, dude, he shot it. Glad, it was a mature buck. You want to shoot mature bucks, whatever. But at the same time, like, I got this struggle on the inside going, I wish that was me.
Oh, yeah.
Not necessarily hating on him, but just like, man, what do I need to do to hunt more, or to, expand my opportunities, or whatever, buy land, get a second tag, start shotgun hunting, whatever, go to another state. I didn't regret what I did, but I was just like, I want to do more.
Oh, yeah, that's totally understandable. Man, I know, right, when someone else kills a buck, of course we want to be happy for them. We are happy for them, celebrate that, but it is still human to have a little bit of that, dang, I wish that was me.
Right. And it wouldn't have happened, if, I don't know, let's say a guy you share a property with, or your neighbor ends up killing Holyfield.
Yeah.
This isn't my property. This isn't, I don't own it. I have permission to hunt on it, just like he does. But it was a buck that I'd been following all year. It was a buck that I'd followed from the previous year as well. And I just was, it's almost like I was envisioning myself killing this deer, whether it was this year or next year. And then someone else went and did it. And it just was like, oh man, I wish that was me. But at the same time, I sent the dude an email, and I was like, hey man, congratulations on a stud buck. That's awesome. And I just asked him, where did you kill him? Because I wanted to find out more information of how he was traveling, or the deer patterns. And he hasn't gotten back to me yet, because I think he's at work. But
or he's like, yeah, of course Dan wants to know where I killed him. I'm not giving him my intel. Oh man, yeah, man. I know how it goes. It happens. It definitely happens. Right. But I was thinking about another part of what you said there, though, about how you wish you could get out more. How many days did you actually get to hunt this season? Because you tagged out on day 4 of your rut vacation. Is that right?
Let me pull up a calendar real quick. I can actually tell you. I started my rut vacation on my first night in the tree stand officially was Friday the 3rd, and I killed my deer on Wednesday the 8th. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 5 full days of hunting. And then you go back into October, and I think I hunted 4 days. So, and I was thinking about that too. You bring up a good point. Man, 365 days in a tree stand. I got to go hunt, or 365 days in a year.
Yeah.
And my hobby, yes, there's other days like doing mineral, trimming out tree stands that may take up 4 days. Checking trail cameras, let's add 2 more days. So now you're at 5. And then it's 17 total days throughout the entire season.
Yeah, that's kind of so of the whole year, you just got to 10 days actually doing the thing that you think about all year, dream about all year, plan for all year.
So my question to you is, how do we, and what I mean guys like us who have more guys like me than guys like you.
I was going to say, I'm a little bit of an outlier.
Right, but let's say the average Joe, the working guy, the family guy, how do we then take and show those facts and statistics to our wives or significant others and say, listen, there's 365 days in a year. My passion, I got 15 days to do it. Why are you complaining on 15 days? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
How do we have that conversation?
Man, I don't know. I feel like it's you just have to somehow have a conversation. I don't know the right way to do it. I have struggles with it sometimes too. Now I have a kind of a get out of jail free card because I can say it's my career, so I get a lot more. I get a lot more leeway than most people, and I understand that. But still, it can be a challenge too. So for me and Kylie, at least, the best thing has just been trying to over communicate about things. I need to plan things way out ahead of time. I try to consult her on, okay, if I was going to be gone for a week, would it be better this week for you or that week? Or, would it be better this year if I do 3-day trips, 3-day trips instead of 1 10-day trip, or different things like that. Just trying to find little ways to compromise. But I don't know. I don't know what the right answer is. I know I'm going to it's going to be a new challenge starting next year with having a baby. I know that you've experienced the added pressures of all that. So I think it's, I don't know, challenge that we all need to kind of navigate in our own unique way.
Oh man, I'm sitting here and people are still out there hunting, and I think I'm going to be able to get a crack at some late season hunting. But it's never as good. You just want to experience the good parts of the years as long as humanly possible. And I made the decision to shoot a deer, right? And that when that happens, that pretty much puts an end to hunting in Iowa, especially if for me in bow hunting. Yes, there's other opportunities, but it's just not the same. Like, I could do gun hunting, but I'm not as passionate about gun hunting as I am archery. So I don't know.
Have you thought about getting a tag in like Illinois or hunt northern Missouri or western Illinois or something that's not too far away from you? Then you can have that added bow season time.
Right. Yeah, and I've put a lot of thought into it, like going to Nebraska. I mean, even a longer trip is okay with me. It's just that, like, I think Missouri and I think Nebraska on the 15th, their firearms season starts. So I don't know if you can bow hunt at the same time as that, but it probably wouldn't be as good. I thought about going over to Illinois, but from what I hear about Illinois, it's similar to Iowa, where there is public ground, but there's not a lot of it. And not to sound arrogant, I've had a lot of people also invite me onto their properties and say, "Hey, Dan, come hunt my property. You can kill whatever you want." I don't want to be that guy.
Yeah.
I don't want to run into a situation where it's, I let you on my property, now you have to let me on your property.
Yeah.
Or I don't want to use whatever status they think I have to go and kill a big deer.
Yeah, I've always felt uncomfortable with that too. I just would rather do things on my own. And
yeah, absolutely.
But I get what you're saying. Man, I don't know. There's something.
I just need to have a blood transfusion with a guy like Andy May.
Yeah,
I get some of his DNA in my system, and I just walk into the woods and kill big deer.
Man, he is a great example, though, of somebody who can, even with a family, even with a job that does not give him like almost any vacation time,
right?
He still has been able to find a way to fit in short out-of-state trips and get it done.
Yep.
He's a great example, that's for sure. So, I had a short out-of-state trip that I kind of want to talk about real quick here before we get Joe on. Are you interested in hearing about
that? Yeah, because you sent me a picture of a really good-looking buck on trail camera going after him tonight, and then I didn't hear anything about it. So, what's the deal?
All right. So, you've followed my hunting season all season with me as we talked about things. The hunt for Holyfield and how it was always like I would hunt one spot and then the next day I'd be somewhere different, but he'd be there, or he'd be one spot, I'd go there the next day and he was somewhere else, that kind of thing, over and over and over again. Well, my Ohio season now has taken that turn as well. So get this. I've got 4 days to spend in Ohio.
Mm-hmm.
I was in Seattle for 2 days last week when we talked last. I got home late Wednesday night. Early Thursday morning, I load up the truck, drive to Ohio. My goal was to get to Ohio in time to get out to hunt that first night. So I get there, and I'm getting all my stuff ready. No, we talked about this already, right? We did talk about this.
Yep.
So that first night, right, I wanted to head out, but the landowner locked his keys in the van.
Yep, we talked about that.
Yes. Okay, so that was night number 1. So I basically didn't get to hunt at all. I just walked to the edge of the field and watched for the last 40 minutes of the night. Night number 1, bad luck of keys getting locked in the landowner's truck caused me to miss out on that hunt. All right, so night number 2, I get there, I head in, get to my stand. Long story short on that night is that towards the last half hour, 45 minutes of daylight, I spot a really nice buck walking away from me on the other side of this finger of timber. Imagine all of the stories I'm going to tell you these next 3 days all involve this one little spot. Hold up your hand and make a peace sign, but facing you, sort of. So you've got the peace sign up, you got that V. Mm-hmm. Imagine the palm of your hand and the 2 fingers sticking up. That is a cornfield, and then the fingers are fingers of that corn sticking up, okay? And then the space in between the peace sign, that gap there is a finger of timber. All right, can you envision this?
Yep, I'm looking at it.
Okay, so on night number 2, the first night I'm actually able to hunt, I'm sitting on the western finger of corn, on the western edge of that timber finger that's sticking down, all right?
Okay, quick question. Is the corn picked?
Corn is picked.
Okay.
Yep.
Continue.
So I'm sitting there, and like I said, like half hour before dark, big buck shows up, but he had come from the eastern finger of corn heading south and walked straight down into the palm of my hand and then onto the neighbors. All that time period either behind the trees so I couldn't get a shot or out of range. So night number 3, I said, all right, I'm going to try to hunt in that area where he came out. And let me take a step back. After that hunt, I pulled trail cameras, and one of the camera cards had him on camera passing by a tree stand I have right there where he came out. So I had him on camera, and then I saw him like 10 minutes later when he was out in the field. And I had a tree stand right there. So night number 3, now I'm going to go, and I'm going to relocate and hunt. Now, again, we're looking at our peace sign. Right where the 2 corn fingers come together at the end of that timbered point, I was going to sit on the ground right there so that if he came out same place he did last night, I would have a shot at him. I would shoot into that inside corner. Or if he came out on the western finger like other deer have done in the past, I could shoot there too. And the wind was good for that. So I left the hotel room, I'm driving to my property, and about 5 minutes before I get to the property, I all of a sudden have this horrible sinking feeling in my gut when I realize I left my scent crusher bag with all of my hunting clothes in it in the hotel room, 35 to 40 minutes away. So I'm like, I have to go back. I have no hunting clothing at all. And the reason why I'd taken it out of my truck was because to run this thing, you need to be plugged in. And you can plug it into your car and use like a cigarette adapter. And so I tried to do that. So I had it in the front seat of my truck. I turned it on and was running when I was driving home the night before. But like, I've heard it's not a good idea to have that ozone in a closed space. And I was like, I don't like running this thing while I'm in here. So I'm not going to do that. So I'll just take it into the hotel room tonight, plug it into the wall, run it real quick there, and then use it the next day. But long story short, I'm taking a step back. I say long story short way too much.
And then you keep talking.
And then I keep talking. I don't end up making it a short story. I've caught myself doing that. It's like my other that being said.
That's right.
So, that being said, long story short, I realize I don't have any of my hunting clothing, so I have to turn around, drive all the way back, 35, 40 minutes back to the hotel room, get my gear. I finally get back to the property an hour and 15 minutes or something like that later. It's now very late, but I'm going to try. So I'm sneaking into the property, and of course, when I get to within sight of that spot that I want to sit, there's already does out feeding there, so I can't get there. So I hunker down, I crawl on the edge of the opposite side of the field up to the spot where these deer had came across the night before. So I thought, well, if these deer come out where they did last year, if they continue traveling, they'd eventually cross the field and come by me. Well, of course, that didn't happen. But a big buck stepped out right where the buck did the night before, and I would have been able to get a shot at him if I was sitting where I wanted to be, but of course I couldn't. So I had to watch him stay right there. He didn't travel across the field to where I was at. He stayed right there, and I just had to sit there kicking myself for forgetting my clothing and not being able to be set up where I wanted to be set up. Right. And then not only that was bad enough, but then it's like it's after dark and the buck's still out there feeding and some does come out. So I'm like, all right, I'm just going to stay here, be quiet, and let them move off so I don't spook them, and then maybe tomorrow night I can get a shot. So I'm sitting there, and I keep on hearing a noise behind me, getting closer and closer. And then I turn, and I'm thinking, okay, there's some kind of critter coming up close here. And I finally see, like 5 yards away from me is a possum, a really big possum. And I'm sitting on the ground, like not in a blind or on a chair, I'm just on the ground. And this possum keeps getting closer and closer and closer. Finally, he's like 3 yards or 4 yards away. And I'm like, all right, this thing's going to walk like right over top of me. I need to scare him away. So I start like shaking some leaves and making some like noises at him to try to scare him away, like make him realize that there's a big thing here he doesn't want to come towards. Instead of that scaring him away, he starts hissing and he charges me. I'm charged by a possum. I'm laying on the ground basically, and this thing's coming right at my face. So I'm like forced to jump up and like try to kick at him so I'm not attacked by a rabid possum.
Did you kick him?
I didn't kick him. He stopped before, but I mean, right there, it was like just about to have to kick a possum in the face.
Oh man, I've done that.
Did you really?
I've kicked a possum. Yeah.
Well, it didn't quite come to that, but it was almost came to blows. But of course, because I had to jump up to fight off this possum, it spooked those does on the other side of the field, and they took off. And so it kind of alerted that buck. He stayed there, but just staring in my direction for a long time. So I kind of spooked those deer, which was upsetting to me. So not only did I not get a shot at him, but then because of a possum attack, I spooked these deer. So that was night number 3. Night number 4, I'm like, all right, there's no way I'm not going to get into this spot I've wanted to hunt. I'm going to get there really early. I'm not going to forget my clothes. I'm going to avoid possums. I'm going to get to the finger of this timber. I'm going to get set up there, and I'll be able to shoot to this inside corner where this buck has come out the last 2 nights. I get there. I'm all set up. I'm thinking this is looking good. The evening's coming along very well. And then an hour before dark, I spot movement out in the field, right where I was sitting the night before. And there's this stupid big 8-pointer comes running out from right where I was at the night before, and then comes running across the field the opposite direction where I can't shoot him either. So, man, it's just been that kind of season, man.
Man, you have literally been in the wrong place every
time. I mean, I cannot catch a break. And it's just, maybe it just reaffirms what all of our listeners have been thinking for years now, that I'm just one of the world's worst deer hunters. Yeah. So that was disappointing, but it was nice to see a good buck 3 nights in a row. I'm not entirely sure if it was the same deer all 3 nights. I think it was a different deer, at least 2 of the nights. But it was a nice 8-pointer, like somewhere in that, like, probably 4-year-old, maybe like 130-ish, maybe a little bigger 8-pointer type deer.
Was this a muzzleloader hunt?
This was, yep. It was their firearm season.
So they were still, when they came out, they were still too far for you to shoot.
Yeah, like that first night, by the time he cleared the trees, he was probably 250 or something like that, or 300. And with my muzzleloader, I'm not shooting past 150. And then the second night, he was, probably about the same distance, but I was looking at him from the opposite direction. And then the final night, he maybe was like 170, 160, 170, 180, maybe somewhere around that range, but he was running by the time I saw him, kind of running across the field, and then disappeared into the timber on the other way. So no shots.
Well, I don't know. I don't even know what to tell you, man. Just like, maybe you should just go back to basics. And when I mean basics, I mean no knowledge of hunting at all, and just go to the same tree stand, the exact same time, the exact same tree stand for like 5 days in a row.
That's exactly what I was thinking. I'm like, you know what? Screw all this, like keeping the deer on their feet. I'm going to trick them by never changing. I'm just going to sit in the same spot the whole rest of the season. I'm going to pick one spot and hunt it like 20 days in a row. Just do the complete opposite of what any half-decent deer hunter would do. And that might actually
what
work.
We talk about.
Yeah. Maybe these deer are figuring us out. They know our new tactics, and they're ahead of us.
Evolution, right? I mean, deer have to evolve to survive, whether that's, becoming,
podcast listeners.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, maybe Holyfield is a subscriber to the Wired to Hunt podcast.
That would explain a lot this year.
Oh man. You see him the next time you see him, you actually put him in the binos, and you're like, are those earbuds in his ears?
He's got the new AirPods. Oh man, yeah. So that's my story. That's Ohio. I'm gonna start hunting Michigan now again tomorrow, though. We got a cold front that just came through today. I'm gonna get after it, and I have one piece of good news to share with you today.
It's twins. Your wife's having twins.
No twins. Better news than that. Well, that I don't know. I mean, that would be great, I guess, but it'd also be very scary. The baby is doing very well, though. By the way.
Good.
Yep, coming along very well. We're down to the final 10 weeks or something like that. But the good news is that as of last Friday, which was the day after Michigan's gun season.
Yep.
I had visual confirmation
Nice.
that Holyfield had made it.
Nice.
So, the big guy, as of Friday, was still alive. Now, muzzleloader season opened that next day, so of course there's still some people out there, but much fewer, much less of a chance of him being killed. So,
Right.
the
And
hunt.
you stayed out of it too, right? So I mean,
Yeah.
that whole sanctuary theory that we've discussed here, that you're going to stay off of it. You've stayed off of it, and hopefully he's found sanctuary on your farm.
Yeah, I mean that's why I think that probably had a big part in why he was able to survive, because he has that place he can hunker down in. And not only did he survive, but then also the 3-year-old that I've been praying would survive, the buck I'm calling Survivor, he made it too. So
Nice.
the 2 best bucks I had on my property this year, both of them made it through firearm season. So
Nice.
that's really encouraging, and gives me something to be excited about for this late season with Holyfield, and gives me something to be excited about for next year with Survivor. So I'm going to get out there tomorrow night with this cold front, assuming the wind stays good for me, and hunt them the next couple days with these really cold temperatures, and hopefully, finally, we'll have a happy story to share.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I don't know how many guys out there are pulling for you still, but I'm pulling for you. And, if you get any more mature bucks on your property, you're probably going to have to open an outfitting business.
I don't know about that. I don't know if one mature buck would draw that many people. But it's enough for me.
That's right.
So I guess on that note, we should probably wrap this up. We've had a pretty long intro here. So let's take a break for our Sitka story, and then we'll get Joe on the line, and then hopefully next week we'll have a story to share.
For this week's Sitka story, we're joined by Jordan Miller of Run to Gun, who's going to be telling us about an elk hunt that ended at 10 steps.
One of my favorite Sitka moments was this year down in New Mexico. Drew a really good archery unit, and we had 6 days to hunt. We used all 6. We were down there on the last day, hiked into one of my buddy Justin's favorite spots, hiked in about 1.5 miles on this long ridge, and finally got this bull to bugle. We had him in. We pulled him all the way into about 40, 50 yards. He just hung up in some brush. We called his cows all the way past us, and he just busted out. We had one last chance to get up on him, and we broke down the mountain, cut up this next ridge, and we heard another bull bugling. We got up right in between them. Justin made one little cow call, and that bull we were after came just tearing down the side of the mountain to get up to that other bull. And little did we know it, that he was going to work about 10 steps from us. Quartered right in, took a shot, had been practicing my bow all summer long at about 100 yards just to get ready for 50 yards. And we drilled this 6x7 public land bull at 10 steps. One of my absolute favorite Sitka moments.
On Jordan's hunt, he was wearing Sitka's mountain pants and mountain vest. If you'd like to create a Sitka story of your own, or to learn more about Sitka's technical hunting apparel, visit sitkagear.com.
All right, with me now is Joe Hamilton. Welcome to the show, Joe.
Thanks, Mark. I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah, and I'm excited to have you on here as well. And I mentioned before we started recording, actually, as I did the introduction to the podcast, that when I went through the QDMA Deer Steward course, maybe 5 or 6 years ago now it was, and you were there, we were down in northern Missouri, and I just became captivated by your stories. Every time you were talking to the group or sharing a story or experience, I just kind of found myself just fully engaged and so interested in what you had to say. So because of that, I've been particularly excited to make this episode happen, because I know our listeners are going to enjoy the same thing. So that being said, I guess, before we dive into the many different topics I was hoping we could cover, could you just kind of bring us up to speed on how you got to this point? Maybe especially what you did before the QDMA, and then we could dive a little bit more deeply into that story. But what was Joe Hamilton doing in the years that led up to that moment?
Well, in the very early years, starting at age 9, I became a hunter, and that led me to the University of Georgia to get a degree in forestry, and then to follow that up with a master's degree in wildlife biology, and I specialized in black bear project for my master's thesis. And then I came to work in South Carolina as a deer research biologist in 1979, and spent 7 years living in a deer pen and conducting a variety of research projects. Most notably was the production of the scale for aging fetuses. That was the biggest part of that long-time project. And then I moved from the northeastern part of the coastal area down to the southeastern corner, the deer-rich low country, and became a regional biologist. And in that capacity, I was working not just with deer, but all species of wildlife, but focusing on deer because I had nearly 800 properties that I dealt with directly on what we called at that time the antlerless deer quota program, better known as the doe quota program. And a little different there for our state than most states in that we issued antlerless tags or doe tags to properties. And I had to stay up with those properties each year and decide how many antlerless tags they were to get. And all the while I was helping them out with changing their perspective on buck harvests to take more bucks to the older age classes before they were harvested. And I think the thing it's really important here is that in the eastern part of South Carolina then and even now, we have a 4.5-month season up until this year with no buck limit whatsoever. And we do have, for the first time around, a buck limit this year, and it's going quite well. Limit is 5, which is still quite liberal, but that's what I got involved with professionally in those early years, and then from the mid '80s for the next few years, I had more and more requests from hunters who had tired of shooting a lot of young bucks, and they were concerned that antler development was down and body weights were down. Well, it was because nearly 90% of their annual harvest was made up by 1.5-year-old bucks. So they said, what can we do to make a difference, to crawl out of this hole we've dug for ourselves? Well, it was very timely that in 1981 I had met Al Brothers, who is the co-author of the very famous book, Producing Quality Whitetails, which came out in 1975. I met Al in Texas, spent a few days with him, and then the next year I was one of the co-hosts for the Southeast Deer Study Group meeting. That's a group that had just started 4 years before that, consisting of professionals from about 16 or 17 southeastern states. Well, we were having this meeting in Charleston, South Carolina, and it was my duty to come up with a keynote speaker. So with the new interest in turning tradition around in the Low Country, and now my connection to Al, I invited him to come to that meeting, our 5th annual Southeast Deer Study Group meeting, and deliver the keynote address. Well, he's quite a deal maker. He thought for a minute. He said, Jose, I will be there. I'll even come a few days early, and I'll stay a few days after the main meeting, as long as you can assure that I'll have a group to talk with every night. And the other part of that deal is you normally have 150 professional people at that meeting. If you'll promise me you'll have 150 deer hunters to match those numbers, I'll be there. Wow. And you gotta know that Al Brothers is a man of commitment. He's rock solid biologically. He had misfortune in doing a deer survey from a helicopter a few years before that, broke his back and his legs were paralyzed. Didn't slow him down, though. what I wanted to point out was he drove a pickup truck using hand controls all the way from Laredo, Texas to Charleston, South Carolina, just to give that keynote address and to meet with select groups of hunters. So when any kind of a leader shows that kind of conviction to a cause, it's easy to fall in line and follow that person. So that was sort of the beginning of the idea of quality deer management infused into the thought processes of our deer hunters here in the southeastern part of South Carolina. And fortunately, there were enough people with large enough acreages to start on a quality deer management approach. And they made a difference pretty quickly, and the doubting Thomases that were near them fell in line pretty quickly, said, seems to be working for you, maybe we can try it as well. The bottom line is, several years after that, we then had nearly 3 million acres in the eastern part of South Carolina on quality deer management guidelines, and that was done voluntarily. Despite the long season and the liberal buck limits. So that's my history with my profession and with quality deer management. We got enough people involved in those early years that we needed to organize them. So in 1988, we started the South Carolina Quality Deer Management Association. Interest went beyond our state borders very quickly, so we decided to drop the South Carolina from our name, and we ultimately became the Quality Deer Management Association, which we are now, with members in all 50 states, half a dozen foreign countries, and most of the Canadian provinces, nearly 60,000 members, and going strong. So
Wow.
Here we are.
Here you are. It's pretty incredible to hear how, some personal relationships and some different things that can lead to something that has grown to such a powerful and positive force within the hunting community today. What were those early years like when you guys first founded the Quality Deer Management Association? What were you guys trying to achieve at that point? And how did it grow from there to such a substantial organization now?
Well, we had some obstacles to overcome. As I mentioned, nearly 90% of our buck harvest was comprised of year-and-a-half-old bucks. The other problem was there was a reluctance among most of these deer hunters to take any female deer. That went very much against tradition. And even when I moved to this county that I live in now, in 1985, there were petitions circulating for people to sign to make it illegal to shoot does in this county. That was a hurdle. Got around that through education. I decided that I would start a radio program that I did once a week. I wrote prolifically for magazines and local newspapers. The biologists that I talked with and I decided we'd have a contest to see if we could average giving a talk a week. And we did that. And in the course of a couple of years, we contacted thousands of people. And we had those pioneers that contacted us initially that wanted to make some change. They not only started passing up young bucks, they started taking a number of antlerless deer, and their neighbors saw very quickly, things seem to be working for you pretty well. Your body weights are getting better. Your antler development is picking up because you're shooting older bucks. That's kind of how it started. And it took years to get people to harvest enough antlerless deer to keep their deer herd in balance with the habitat conditions. But all the while, bucks were getting older, the hunters were going from one level of management to the next. All we were trying to do initially was take a significant portion of the 1.5-year-old bucks to 2.5 before they were harvested. And then when hunters got involved in that approach, they decided, well, we'll just start taking more to the 3.5-year-old category. And, you know, the rest is history. There are people now that are taking deer not on the basis of the kind of antlers they have, but the shape of their bodies. They're shooting 4.5 and 5.5-year-old bucks, regardless of their antler development. And the hunters are happy, the deer are healthy, and things are working pretty well. The other factor that started to come into play in those early days was the idea that maybe we can do something with habitat and create food plots and then work more with our foresters and try to integrate forestry and wildlife management and even work on fallow fields and try to make them productive. Craig Harper at the University of Tennessee, of course, is a great proponent of that, trying to manage old fields for natural vegetation, which deer have been making a living on for forever. And so it's all come together. And I think the thing to really boast about now is not so much the size of our organization. We're 60,000 strong, but the impact of our educational efforts has been nationwide. It's to the point that in 1999, there were more antlerless deer harvested that year than antlered. That came only through education and persistence and just driving that message home that that's what the deer herd needed. Fairly even sex ratio, numbers in balance with the habitat conditions, and then a few years after that, we've been tracking the percent of 1.5-year-old bucks in the harvest since about '89, and at that time when we started, it was approaching 80% nationwide. A couple of years ago, that number bottomed out at around 34% of the bucks killed that year, and then a little bit higher percent of 3.5-year-old bucks were harvested, and that happened for 2 years in a row. And I would assume this past year it'll probably hold true that we're harvesting more 3.5 and older bucks than 1.5-year-old bucks. I don't see that changing backwards. It will more than likely just get better and better.
Yeah.
But the impact of our educational efforts is really something to boast about. We're very proud that our education has gone to that point, and so the deer herd has benefited from that, and certainly deer hunters have as well.
Absolutely. So what do you think about then where the QDMA, where the Quality Deer Management Association is today, given some of these goals being accomplished that you just mentioned? How do you feel about where the organization and the impacts of the organization are today, and then what do you think about the future? Where are things going? What kind of impact can the QDMA have in the years to come?
I'm glad you mentioned that, Mark, because we are at a turning point. We have proven that with our educational capacity and the variety of programs that we have, that we can meet the challenges of the present, and we've done that. We've helped take more bucks of the older age classes. We've helped balance sex ratios, helped balance deer numbers with habitat conditions. What we're looking at now would be a relatively long list of changes that some are even accelerating. For example, we just got a survey, the results of a survey recently that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service conducts every 5 years, And in the last 5 years, we have lost over 2 million deer hunters. So we were at a high a few years ago of maybe 14.5 or so million, and we're down, I think it's 2.1 million deer hunters. There are several reasons for that. Number one, the baby boomers are aging out of being very actively involved in hunting. Number two, the thing that's going on is we have a problem with recruitment of young hunters into deer hunting because of so many diversions. Sports especially are keeping kids busy these days, and so we have low recruitment and lower retention. So we're going to have to face those problems. We have predator problems that seems to be that they're getting worse by the year, and it's not just coyotes. It's black bears are on the increase, and in some cases bobcats are as well. But the coyote is the one animal that sort of changed my life as a biologist in the Southeast. When I first encountered them in the late 70s, I told the people around me, I said, well, Mother Nature will solve that problem, because if you have a canine in this part of the world that's not on heartworm tablets, they're not going to last long. And then there's parvovirus, there's rabies, distemper, on down the line, mange. There are a lot of things that'll keep these coyotes from being very effective as predators. Boy, was I wrong on that. We still don't have many coyotes dying of old age, but they can do enough damage in their first few years to change our lives as deer managers, and they have. In those early years, we were complacent, realizing that the deer herd, the females were averaging more than one fawn per doe. Now, in some areas, and even in my neighborhood, it takes 3 or 4 does to bring one fawn into the fall population, and that's the definition of recruitment. It's the number of fawns, not that are just born in the summer, but those that are actually recruited into the fall population. So we've had to change our entire way of thinking about prescribing deer harvest on an annual basis. We've had to pull the reins back a little bit on being so aggressive at harvesting does. We've had to focus on the time of the year those does are taken. I've been a proponent of now taking adult does late in the season to lengthen that parental bond between the doe and the fawn, to give the fawn that much more of a jump start for future survival. So we've had a lot of changes to make in the face of this new predator. There are places, Pennsylvania, for example, where the bear population is still increasing, and the study done a few years ago indicated that black bears actually killed more fawns than did the coyotes. Well, not many more. I mean, it was like 15 fawns killed by bears and 14 killed by coyotes just in one area, but still, bears are on the increase in numbers and in their occupied range. North Carolina is a good example of bears extending their range, especially in the eastern part of the state, from those coastal counties, moving more and more inland, and bears have been proven to be very effective predators of fawns. So those are some of the changes we've had to deal with, and we are, as an organization, going to be really pushing more and more research to find out more about the effect of these predators on deer populations. We've got to do all we can to work with mentoring programs to bring more kids on board, to hang on to those that we have. And so we've got new challenges to face. We've got disease problems that are tied maybe indirectly to the captive deer industry. Chronic wasting disease is the main disease that we're concerned about. That's a disease that's always fatal. Once the deer gets it, it does not live through it. And all the while it's alive, it sheds prions into the soil that can affect other deer. And we're having to watch that very closely. It also seems that that a disease we've been living with here for forever was EHD, or epizootic hemorrhagic disease. That's a viral disease that's transmitted by the little no-see-em gnats. That disease is spreading northward and westward, northwestward, into areas that heretofore had no experience with that disease. And when it does move into a new area, those deer have no background, no antibodies built up, and it really hits them hard. So they're experiencing, especially in the Northeast, in the last few years, I think 2012 was a particularly bad year, and then maybe another couple of years ago, 50 to 75% of some local deer populations were lost to that disease. We don't see near that degree of mortality in the Southeast because our deer have a history with the disease. There are some new problems, though, that there are a variety of serotypes of the disease, and we keep seeing new serotypes pop up, and these, even in the Southeast, are causing higher mortality because the deer have no history with that serotype of the virus. So, our future is clouded with obstacles, but again, there's no better organization around than the QDMA to identify and to face those obstacles through research and through education, and we're poised to do that. We've got a tremendous force of biologists on hand. Not a large number, but educationally we're about as deep as anybody can be around here. And Mark, as you well know, with these deer steward courses that we have, we're educating hundreds of people every year, and that's what it's going to take to be able to keep your ear to the ground and know what's going on with the local deer herds, and to report problems back to the proper officials. We need to know about these problems so we can identify them and then come up with ways to ameliorate some of those problems. So,
yeah.
The future changes for everybody, but I think we're capable of meeting those challenges.
I 100% agree with you. And as you mentioned, through this these different challenges you mentioned, I think that they impact a wide array of deer hunters, not just private landowners who have a ton of ground that manage deer, but these things impact all of us. And based on the fact that you're saying that the Quality Deer Management Association is going to be focusing on these types of challenges, and given some of the other things I've heard about the goals and how things might be shifting a little bit in the future with the QDMA, is it fair to say that your organization is wanting to make a very clear statement that the QDMA is for all deer hunters and not just maybe the stereotype, which was this? I think there was this misunderstanding with a lot of people. They thought QDM was just for rich guys with a bunch of property who wanted to grow really big antlered deer. That was kind of the negative stereotype of what quality deer management meant to some people. I think anyone who really understands the organization and the tenets of it understands that's not the case, but it seems like now from the things I'm hearing, the organization itself is trying to make it very clear that that's not the case, and that you are focused on things that impact all deer hunters, and especially with your new goals that I saw come out this year, that really seems to be it's strongly asserted and very clear. Am I right in seeing that in that interpretation?
how we got stereotyped in those early years, because the people that came to us were those that controlled a large enough tract of land to manage effectively as an individual unit without regard to what their neighbors were doing. These were not just landowners, but these were organized hunting clubs that leased, in many cases, thousands of acres. And we have, since day one, been an organization for all deer hunters. And we've begged their involvement from an educational point of view. Everybody needs to know what's going on with deer. And those people that have relatively small areas to hunt on have been brought together with a fairly recent approach for QDM cooperatives. Michigan, for example, has several hundred QDM co-ops going. We've also hired 2 people in Missouri that work with co-ops on a full-time basis. That has been the approach. The other thing I wanted to point out, though, was that what many hunters are not aware of is that the QDMA is very active with advocacy issues. These are issues at the local, state, and federal level. We average being involved in about 100 issues a year, and these range anywhere from access to hunting to Sunday hunting to changing the minimum age for young hunters to a younger age to get them into the fold of hunting sooner. Now, I think there are some states where you've got to be 12 years old or older before you can actually carry a gun hunting. That's certainly not the case here in South Carolina. We have no minimum age, and there are some very precocious youngsters that are killing their first deer at age 5 or 6. Might be too young in the opinion of some people, but these kids grew up with hunting, and by the time they're 6, they're ready to get involved with it. But I think the general population of deer hunters need to know that we go to bat for them almost on a daily basis with regard to rules and regulations concerning deer management, season lengths, bag limits, poaching fines. We've been involved in all of that, and if we hadn't been, they would have lost access to properties. They would have lost in a number of ways, maybe even in the eyes of the non-hunting public. I think what we've done through our organization, we've brought the hunter to the forefront in people's opinions to see that we are good stewards of the land and the resource, and that we police our own ranks, and we couldn't afford not to do that. But our organization, I think, has gone to great lengths to protect the rights and the access of hunters across the board. So, yeah, it is for everybody. Even somebody hunting on a relatively small piece of property that they just have permission to hunt on, they need to know that we're standing behind them, legislatively especially.
Yeah.
Make sure they can still have access to those properties.
Yeah, well, I certainly fall into that camp. Not owning any land myself and just hunting small parcels, and I certainly know that there are benefits to being involved with the Quality Deer Management Association, and I certainly appreciate the work you guys are doing. But real quick now, before we move on to anything new, I want to take a quick second to thank our partners at Whitetail Properties.
This week with Whitetail Properties, we are joined by Tony Hansen, a land specialist out of Michigan, and Tony is going to be telling us about what factors matter most on a property in high-pressure areas.
Well, to me, it's variety. So even though I own and kind of hunt a lot of small properties, you got to look for a mix of things. You need food for sure, but you need cover probably even more. So, I need to have all of the pieces that the deer needs, because I don't want them traveling very far, and I don't want them to feel like they have to travel very far. Because, especially during our gun season, when there's, nearly 1 million guys out there, if a deer moves, it's got a real good chance of getting shot. So I try to find properties that have everything you need right there. And yes, neighborhood matters, but it doesn't matter quite as much as what you can, do right there on your own property. So you want to make sure that you have food and cover and, bedding areas, security places, and sanctuaries are a big thing with me too. So I look for a lot of variety in the property.
If you'd like to learn more and to see the properties that Tony currently has listed for sale, visit whitetailproperties.com/Hansen. That's HANSEN.
I want to kind of shift gears a little bit here, because obviously, based on what we've just heard, you've had a long and kind of storied history when it comes to your involvement with deer hunting and deer management and conservation, all these different types of things. And you recently have kind of compiled, a collection of some of those thoughts and stories and experiences of that history in a book. That book being Firepot Stories, which came out earlier this year. And I want to hear a little bit about that book, but something I want to ask you first, because I think within the pages of this book, I haven't read the entire book yet. I've read portions of it, but from what I've seen so far, I think you answer the question I'm about to ask. I think you answer it within the pages of this book, spread out over the entire book. But I'm curious if you can synthesize this in one answer, which is this, Joe. Why do you hunt? That's my question.
I was introduced to hunting at a very early age. My dad was a hunter. His dad was a hunter. So it just seemed to be the thing to do. And then once I became involved in it, I fell in love with just being out of doors and the challenges of learning all the critters that I was sharing the out of doors with, not just by sight, but by sound. And I very quickly learned that the more that I knew about these critters, the more at home that I felt when I was out of doors. Those of us that started going into the woods before daylight as youngsters were afraid of everything. And education taught me that I just am now a part of all these different goings-on in the out of doors. The other thing that comes out of that is once you learn more about all these critters that you're spending time with and you're in their habitat, you become more of a steward of them and their habitat. And that's what got me involved. That's what keeps me involved. And I'm 70 years old now. I'm a very active hunter. In fact, I spent the whole morning at our skinning shed processing a deer that's been hanging for about 2 weeks. And we eat venison several times a week year-round, and I process all of my own meat. So I'm still very much involved in hunting. I've got 2 grandsons now, and the oldest is 6. He I think is a little bit too young to have a gun, but he has been with us a number of times this year. Went out rattling one morning about just a few weeks ago and rattled in a buck. It was the first deer he'd ever seen in the woods. So what story does he have to tell the rest of his life that the first deer he saw, his grandfather rattled in? And then a deer was shot in the neighborhood recently, and the hunter couldn't find it. And I took my tracking dog out that night with not just my 2 grandsons, but 2 of their cousins. And everybody had a flashlight. We had the dog on a lead, and we trails on and on and on, and found the deer, and everybody was asked to bow their head and have a moment of silence to pay tribute to the animal. And then we dragged it out, took it to the skinning shed, and field dressed it, hung it in the cooler to age for a few weeks. So we're getting them involved in hunting activities without even guns being involved on their part. So that's how I came on board, and I think that's the way to get these youngsters involved. They need to understand the entire process of hunting and processing the meat and sharing it with family and friends and that kind of thing. So that's a long way to answer your question, why did I hunt? I think genetically it was instilled within me that I had to, and once I got a taste of it, I just stayed with it.
Yeah. So that's why you hunt. Why did you write this book? Why put this book together, and what is it kind of comprised of? What's found in those pages?
I've been a great disciple of Aldo Leopold, who is the father of my profession. He passed away when I was only a year old, but he was the first professor of wildlife biology ever at the University of Wisconsin, and he wrote a book entitled A Sand County Almanac. And his teachings were that those of us that were in the profession, and this was pre-television, needed to meet with our constituents on a regular basis, and those were the hunters we worked with and for, and educate them any way possible, either through public speaking or writing articles for local newspapers or even doing radio shows. And then when I got to the University of Georgia, the professors that I had there were certainly disciples of Leopold as well, and they all talked about the importance of writing. So my writing days go back to my days at the University of Georgia, and the earliest entry in my book was a newspaper article I wrote in 1972. So only a few years ago did I realize that I've been amassing a pretty good variety of stories about hunting and fishing, and some very biologically oriented stories or articles. And I thought, well, if I corral these things together, I might have enough to make a book. So I put my outline together and started filling in the gaps, and I wrote some stories in the last few years to fill in those gaps. But I now have a book comprised of 10 chapters with 76 stories. And as you know already, Mark, in having read a sampling of those, some are very scientifically oriented, management oriented. Others are just funny stories that have occurred over the years of hunting and fishing. And when I was talking with Jeff Foxworthy about a request for him to put a quote on the back cover of my book, I told him that for a person that I know has walked into a covey of wild quail and flushed them and watched them fly that many directions, only now can you appreciate the many directions my stories have flown. So that's just the way to sum it up. I mean, it's a very unique book in that, first of all, I wrote some of the stories long enough ago, and I learned that I was not altogether right on some topics. I was a little too light with my approach to the importance of coyotes, for example. And I went back to at least 6 stories and did sort of a Paul Harvey approach, which he had a radio program, and he called his The Rest of the Story. I called mine The Follow-Up, and in some cases my follow-up was longer than my original story, but I was able to revisit those original stories written 20 or 25 years ago and bring them up to date and correct the things that I was wrong about, and even boast a little bit about the predictions I made that came true. So I've got about 6 stories that have a follow-up to them. I think the most unique part of the book is that it has chapter 1 at both ends. And how did that happen? Well, when I got to the end of my journey and I realized I had my book, I needed a way to close it. I didn't want to say goodbye. This is the end. And I spent a long while on some property that I grew up hunting on in North Carolina. And I realized that was chapter 1 in my life. And I've been fortunate now, having lived long enough, that I've hunted with, and I have friends in 4 different generations that have hunted on that very property. And so that property was chapter 1 in their lives as well. So that's how that last chapter got its name, and the way that I closed it, I was on a youth turkey hunt that particular morning, and after the hunt was over, I sat on the porch of a cabin all the rest of the day trying to decide how to end this book. And it only happened after I got in my truck very late in the afternoon and made the 4-mile drive out to the highway at a very slow pace with my windows down so I could listen to nature. And I was hearing a variety of birds. I was hearing a variety of frogs like spring peepers and narrow-mouthed toads and on, and realizing that all these little tiny critters that were about an inch long, these little frogs, were very site-specific in where they lived. And I knew that, and I was able to ride along, could have even ridden with my eyes closed, with a mental map of where I was riding along, because this particular frog stays in a stream, this particular frog stays in a little pool that might drop, and then they move on and on. But I got to the highway and I thought, this is an exercise in education, and there will never, ever be a final exam. So there's the challenge. Keep learning and keep appreciating nature. The more you know, the more you'll appreciate it. The more you know, the stronger you'll work as a steward to protect it. And that's how I ended the book, was with a challenge rather than saying goodbye, this is the end. This is actually the beginning. So there's everything in between. There are some stories that'll make you laugh. There are some that'll make you cry. There'll be some that'll teach you some things you didn't know before, and that's always a good thing. So there's something in that book for everybody, but there's not everything for everybody.
As it should be.
Yeah, that's right.
There's a chapter within the book that I read, and it spoke about the path of a hunter and kind of this evolution towards developing the hunter's spirit. Could you talk a little bit about that, what that means, about that path of the hunter, the hunter's spirit, and kind of your thoughts on that and this journey that many of us hunters go through, why that's so important?
Well, there are about 5 major stages that you go through, and I'm not going to list all 5 of those, but I'll start with the first one, and it's one that Aldo Leopold referred to as the trigger itch stage, where people want to go out and get their limit. They want to kill as many as they can legally, and numbers are important. Shooting is important. You learn through time and hopefully through the experiences and with the influence from our elders that's maybe not necessarily the approach to take. You become more custodial, or you become a better steward as you're going through these different stages. And the final stage you get to is one of ultimate stewardship, where you start looking more toward photography or artwork to stay in touch with hunting. You take on more responsibility to act as a mentor, to bring youngsters on board, and that's where I am now. I'm much more excited about taking youngsters and introducing them to hunting and just being out of doors than ever before. And then there are all those different steps in between. There is not a recipe on how long you would stay on each plateau. It might take you several years to progress from that first shooter's stage, or that one with trigger itch, to the next one, and then to level 3, and to level 4, and then finally to level 5. The speed at which you go through that is not as important as the path and the direction. If you have an unwavering path going through those different plateaus, you're becoming a better steward along the way and a better representative of the hunting fraternity. So I mentioned that in a couple of different stories in the book, but that is the hunter's path. It's sort of a natural progression to just get better and better and better at what you do. But there's an old saying, you live and learn. Some people only live and don't learn, and some hunters get involved in hunting and never change. They stay in that trigger itch stage right on through the whole process, and that's unfortunate for them. It's unfortunate for hunting that there are people like that, but it's incumbent upon us that recognize the educational process to bring them into the fold and to help lead the way by example and through education to get them to appreciate what they have access to. So that's the hunter's path, and it's mentioned twice in different stories in the book.
Yeah, and I think you do a nice job of illustrating that journey throughout, as you said, throughout the book. It's kind of woven through many of your stories in different ways. And then I think another example of a way to educate ourselves about some of those elements of the hunter's path and that stewardship is another book that you mentioned earlier, that being a Sand County Almanac by Aldo Leopold. I think many of those core tenets of becoming a steward and of taking those steps as a hunter, I think those are discussed and shown throughout Aldo's story as well. I think a perfect example of that being one of Leopold's lessons learned, in his essay Thinking Like a Mountain, where he spoke about a topic you mentioned earlier, that being predators, and how he had, as a young kid, had always thought, I'll just shoot every wolf or coyote would be a good thing. He thought it was fun to kill them, and every fewer wolves, there'd be more deer. And then he kind of had this aha moment as he started to understand how all of these things are more interconnected than that, and that there was a place for all of these different pieces and parts of the ecosystem, wolves and deer and humans and all of those things, as one part of a whole. Why does the Sand County Almanac resonate with you so much? Because I know you've mentioned it quite a few times, both in this book and in past times I've heard you speak. Why is that something that you think hunters should look to as another source of knowledge and direction?
Well, I mentioned the importance a minute ago of mentoring, and if you had to read any one book that was available as a book that would mentor you through the different steps of hunting, it would be a Sand County Almanac, because it talks about your role as a hunter and a manager, and not a despoiler of wildlife, and it reinforces that necessity to be a good steward of our natural resources. And just one example after another in that book, and it just teaches you how to be aware of your surroundings. My book, by comparison, has all these stand-alone stories. Leopold's book, like most other books, is a progression of thought. You flow from one to the next, to the next, to the next. My book has standalone stories, with one exception. I have one story that has a sequel to it. Then I have one chapter that's a trilogy, and it's all about one person that I grew up hunting with, a fellow that was part Cherokee Indian from the Appalachian region of North Carolina, and he was the ultimate storyteller for one thing, and I probably got some of my storytelling from being around him so much in my early years. But aside from that trilogy and then that one story that has a sequel to it, all the other stories are standalone. So if the stories were published, I put at the end of that story when and where, whether it was a magazine or a newspaper article or whatever. But there are a number of stories in there and some transcripts from talks that I had given here in the States and in Australia, and I put that transcript in as a story. So therein lies the variety in this book. I mean, it goes in every direction. But Leopold was a person that I wish I had known. I got to know him through his writings, and I can only hope that I'll be remembered that same way many years from now, because I just felt it important to take all that I knew about hunting and put it between two covers.
Yeah.
And I think I've done that for this book, and I think it's important that you can enjoy any experience that's outdoors related, and even down to reading about hunting. It can be funny, and it can and should be fun. It should be enjoyable. The more you understand about it, the more you're going to do it correctly and enjoy it more fully. So that's Leopold's influence on me, and I hope my influence comes through to the readers of my book as well.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of that book then, and of the power of story, because in many cases the things you've talked about here, they're these, lessons learned, these important things to think about as far as becoming stewards. All these things many times are conveyed through a story. And man, I'm a glutton for stories. I remember as a little kid going up to our family deer camp. There was a guy who went up to our camp with us. His name was Terry, and he was probably 25 or 30 maybe, and I was like 8 years old at the time. And I would just follow him around all day at camp. I'd sit next to him in the truck when we were driving up to camp. I would sit next to him in the cabin, and every second there wasn't talking happening, I would just say, "Hey, can you tell me a deer hunting story? Can you tell me your story? Can you tell me the story of your first buck? Can you tell me the story of how you killed your, this buck?" And maybe that's why I'm doing what I'm doing today. I'm asking people to tell their own stories still now, many, many years later. But I guess the point of me saying all that, Joe, is out of your book and these many different experiences and stories you shared, is there a favorite story or a hunting story in your life that stands out the most, that you could share with us? Any story that stands out to you would be pretty interesting to me.
Oh my goodness, they're all favorites for that matter.
Right.
One was very humorous, and it's entitled "The Upside Down Goat." I was probably 14 years old or so at the time, 15 maybe, and we had killed a deer on this property near my hometown in southeastern North Carolina, and I didn't know anything about skinning or gutting or anything. And in those days, when the club killed a deer, they processed it that day, immediately after the hunt. So I was standing around in this little shelter on an old abandoned farm, and watching the process. They first of all skinned the deer, and they gutted it. And I was standing there with my hands in my pockets, and all of a sudden, something hit me from behind, and I landed on my back and looked up, and I was staring at the chin of a big wide-horned billy goat. And everybody around laughed at what had happened. I was just embarrassed to the nth degree. And I hunted on that property for a number of years, and that goat was always there, and he was always hiding behind something and waiting till you got out into the open before he attacked you. So I had invited a cousin of mine down from Fayetteville, which is near Fort Bragg. He wasn't a hunter at all, but I said, come on down, spend the weekend with me, and I'll take you deer hunting. And back in those days, it was dog hunting only in eastern North Carolina. Nobody still hunted. And so I said, you come with me, and I'll put you on the stand, and we'll stay there until lunchtime. Then we'll come out and have sardines and crackers and cheese for lunch, and then we'll hunt that way again in the afternoon. Well, we went through the old barnyard where there were a few hogs running around and didn't see the billy goat. I had mentioned him, and we hunted for a few hours and came back through the barnyard and had gotten to the very middle of the opening, and my cousin said, there he is, here he comes. And there was an old abandoned car there in the farmyard, and we got up on top of that, and this goat was going around and around and around. We thought that was pretty funny, but we were held captive by this marauding goat. And then all of a sudden, the goat jumped to the hood of the car and then to the top and was standing between us. Not enough room for a big, wide-horned billy goat and two youngsters. We peeled off the car and made a mad dash for the gate, which was about 100 yards away. And got almost to the gate. The goat was closing the distance, and I grabbed a low-hanging limb and swung up into the tree. My cousin missed the limb. So he and the goat were going around and around this tree. All the while, he kept extending his hand, said, pull me up, pull me up. Well, I'm not a fool. It's going to be much easier for him to pull me down than for me to pull him up. And I said, you just got to do it yourself. Do it like I did. Just climb the tree. So we finally got together up in the tree, and then the other hunters started gathering at the gate, only to see the two of us in this tree with the goat going around and around us. Very humiliating. But I put a picture in that article of a goat, and I turned him upside down to go along with the title. So there's some stories like that, and I will say, all of these stories are true. They all happened the way I portrayed them. Some of the stories I put in there were told to me, and there may be some element of doubt as to how truthful they were from start to finish. But like an old-timer told me one time, well, I just had to tell it like I heard it. and I wrote it like I heard it in some cases. But yeah, there are a lot of stories like that. There's a turkey hunting story in there that is rather comical toward the end, and there's some good fishing stories. So, as I said a while ago, there's a little bit of something in there for everybody, and I just hope the readers enjoy the twisted journey through all my personal stories.
Mm-hmm. All right, before we move on, let's take a quick break to thank our partners at Matthews Archery for their support of this podcast. And as you might have seen on social media over the past few weeks, Matthews has just launched their new flagship bow for 2018, the Matthews Triax. And here with us to talk a little bit more about what the Triax has to offer is Matthews design engineer Mark Hayes.
The Triax is the result of an extremely focused goal that we had this year for 2018, and that was to make the stealthiest bow of all time. And with that focused goal, there's two things that we're looking at. We're looking at the most efficient bow that we could possibly make. And what that does is the lost energy in a bow is usually sound and vibration. So if you can make a bow as efficient as possible, you're going to lower the amount of energy that you have to actually deal with. Once we lowered that, with our EHS and the new position, which we're calling 3D dampening, that bow is the quietest and most vibration-free bow that we've ever made. And we're seeing it now, once the bows are hitting the shops now and people are experiencing it, that the Halon was a great platform. And it's hard to believe that the vibration could get better, but it is noticeably better. And it's fun to see people's reactions on that. It was built for close quarters. Us Eastern guys were in Midwest. We're used to blinds and tree stands, and the geometry of the bow is good for that. Obviously, it is a short bow, axle to axle. Now, it feels like a bigger bow with our short limbs and our big cams and everything, but it is amazing how easy that is to carry around and how maneuverable it is. And that was kind of a byproduct of our first goal, was to just make the stealthiest killing machine of all time, really. So the newest thing, what people will definitely see, is that 3D dampening. We move that damper out in front of the bow, and if you could imagine a twisting motion, our dampers were normally, underneath the hand, and you don't get the full rotation and that twisting for that damper to work. So by moving it out, we're using all three directions. That's where 3D comes from, to really dampen that energy, and that's why the user cannot feel it when they actually shoot. It's really incredible.
If you'd like to learn more about the Mathews Triax, you can visit www.matthewsinc.com. You mentioned how back in those days it was just hunting with dogs, most of what you guys did. And that's something that's very unique to the South. Being a Michigander up here in the northern part of the country, I'm far removed from the culture of hunting in the South. And sometimes I what's the word I'm looking for here? I don't give our southern members of our audience enough attention as far as things that are happening for them and the culture of hunting that they're a part of down there. Can you speak a little bit about that? What it's been like as a hunter down south, how that might be different than some of the things we've experienced in my neck of the woods up here? And maybe in particular, I'd be curious to hear about dog hunting and how that's a part of the culture down there and some different things along those lines.
Well, I think we probably inherited that style of hunting from our European ancestors. But dog hunting has been a part of our tradition for as long as we've been settled in this part of the world. When I grew up, as I mentioned, it was dog hunting only in eastern North Carolina. I've been around long enough to see that change to the point now that there are not many people still dog hunting, for a long list of reasons. Number one, they don't like to be able to keep a big pack of dogs, and the other is their hunting properties have gotten smaller and smaller, and all the while the problems with neighbors have increased over time. By comparison, when I hunted, the loose-knit club that I hunted with hunted about a 700 or 800 acre tract bordering the Cape Fear River, and nobody to our left or right or south of us hunted at all. So if our dogs left our property in pursuit of a deer, they were usually back within a few hours. For one thing, the deer would make a big loop and come back, but it didn't bother anybody. If the dogs ran the deer to the river and crossed the river, then there was a club over there as well who did the same thing. We had their dogs running deer across the river to our side of the river, so that was not a problem. But that has changed over time to the point that every single property that's hunted has a neighboring hunter on it. And what's changed is that there are more and more people that still hunt who don't appreciate having dogs run through their properties. So that's been the biggest change that's happened with dog hunting. I will pat the dog hunters on the back and congratulate them. In Georgia, a few years ago, they realized that they were on thin ice, and a faction of their leadership met with legislators, and they came up with a set of guidelines, I think a minimum acreage, and different ways that they were to police themselves, and they essentially saved dog hunting in the eastern part of Georgia by having those guidelines. Still hunting is very strong these days in that part of the world, but dog hunting is too. I see that dog hunting is changing in all these other states as well, and it's probably going by the wayside quicker than those that are participating in it would like to see, but it's because they're not sticking to a set of guidelines like the Georgia deer hunters set up for themselves. Dog hunting is still popular in eastern Virginia, eastern North Carolina, eastern South Carolina, Florida, and then some of the Gulf Coast states, all the way around through Louisiana. A number of years ago, they stopped dog hunting in East Texas because of the conflicts with other hunters and other landowners, neighboring landowners. So it's sort of a dying art, a dying tradition, and it'll last in certain pockets because of large enough acreage to participate in that. But I see those acreages changing to the negative side. They're getting smaller and smaller over time. So it was the way to hunt at one time, and it's now has been taken over by still hunting, which has become the way to hunt. I've seen archery and muzzle loading hunting gain in tremendous popularity over the years. So if you look at deer hunting in the last 20 or 50 or 75 years, change has been the bottom line to all of that, and we just have to keep up with that change, with the demands of the future, and we have to accept that some of these traditions wear thin, and maybe it's time for them to go on the shelf. But that's just a natural progression. It's just the thing that's happening. Whether social problems are causing that or biological problems or whatever, it's just we have always faced change. We've got to keep facing it.
Yeah. Very true. Very true.
Yeah.
So for those still hunting right now, and two things. Number one, when you were referring to still hunting back there, when you were speaking about the differences in hunting, you were speaking more about hunting from a stand or staying still, right? Not like the stalking type hunting, or am I misinterpreting that?
Yeah, there's some terminology that's different north and south. Up your way, still hunting is stalking, and down our way, another way to describe stalking, a good friend of mine calls it slipping and tipping.
I like that.
It's moving. Most people move too quickly and see a lot of white flashes and don't kill many deer with that technique. You have to be able to move with stealth, very quietly, always stop in a shadow, always hunt into the wind or on a crosswind, and never be in a hurry. There's one exception to that, and I've got that in my book, in a story called Stalk, Look, Listen, and I used a little hand diagram of an old-timey railroad crossing, which used to say, stop, look, listen. I called mine Stalk, Look, Listen, and it was designed for the rut. So the thing for you to do is to move rather quickly through the woods and keep your ears wide open for that telltale sound of a courtship in progress. If you hear a buck grunting, And if the buck chases the doe through an opening beyond your range, wait till they're gone and then move there quickly, because realizing the doe's small home range, she'll likely circle around and come right back through there. You'll be in a better position to make a good assessment of the buck, shoot it if it's mature enough and it's what you want, or you know for sure he's chasing an adult deer, so you can take the antlerless deer. But that's the one time where you would stalk quickly. All the other times you just need to slow it down and stalk very slowly. But yeah, there's one difference north and south. When we talk about still hunting down here, we're referring to sitting still on a stand that's either freestanding or in a tree, or now, more recently, in a ground blind. That's our definition of still hunting. We sit there and wait for the deer to come to us.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of tactics and things along those lines, for those down in the southern half of the country, or down, even more regionally, maybe by you, whether they're hunting South Carolina or North Carolina or anywhere around there, for those guys that are still hunting in the late season, do you have any general advice for success at this time of year, now that we're into December, kind of on the downhill slide of the season?
Well, down here, when we have a 4.5-month season, by this time of the year, many hunters are looking forward to that last day. They've pretty well hunted out. I, on the other hand, am looking forward to these remaining 2 weeks, because I've done everything I need to do for this year. I've pretty well taken care of the freezer. I'm going to hunt every opportunity I can, because my trail cameras keep telling me that there are bucks out there that know my Social Security number. That not only have I not seen them, my cameras have not seen them in the daytime. And these deer are denizens of darkness. They operate almost totally on a nocturnal basis, and they have the whole season, even with very low hunting pressure. But this is the bottom line to quality deer management. You go into the woods now knowing that those deer are there. In my early years, I went into the woods wishing and hoping that a deer of that caliber was there, and didn't know that there was probably not a deer in the county where I was hunting that was a deer of my dreams. And if you look in the very first page of my book, there's a painting that a friend of mine's mother did years and years ago, and it's a decent 8-point buck chasing a doe. And the caption on that artwork was, the dreams I had as a beginning hunter became reality only through management. And that's what we've done for ourselves. We have created, through quality deer management, a situation where going hunting now has an element of promise, sometimes a thin promise, but an element of excitement as well, that those deer are there. Now it's up to you to show your prowess and to cross paths with that animal. And the season may close without you ever seeing that animal, but you see their tracks, you find their shed antlers after the season, you know they're there, you know they're going to be there next year and even bigger next year. So for me, as a 70-year-old, there's more excitement in hunting now than ever before. And I think it's incumbent upon us to share that with every youngster we can. Get them out there and let them know what's there. Let them know that none of this is by accident. It's all by design and good management. And it's here because we've been good stewards.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's so true. Kind of along those lines, maybe. as we wrap things up here, I want to steal a question from a guy named Tim Ferriss that I follow, and he likes to ask this question to the guests of his podcast. I want to spin this one out to you, Joe, as kind of a concluding thought here. If you were given a billboard on the side of the highway, let's say maybe it's the side of the highway leading to a Bass Pro Shops or Cabela's, and you knew there was going to be a lot of deer hunters passing by that billboard, what phrase or words, what message would you put on that billboard for deer hunters to see?
I tell you what, a mental image would be a photograph or a painting of a hunter, an older hunter, sitting on a log next to a younger hunter, and that being viewed from behind. So you could, in the foreground, you could see the log and the two hunters sitting there, and you could see a view down through a valley of what they were looking at. And the message would be a part of nature, become a good steward.
Yeah.
Usually the shorter the message, the stronger.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the message I like to convey to other hunters and even to non-hunters is there's a heck of a lot to get out of being in the outdoors. Whether you're sitting on a stump or sitting on a log, but the importance of sharing that not only with a fellow hunter, but especially with a young hunter, bring them on board so they can enjoy the things that you've long enjoyed. And just enjoy being a part of nature. And take pride in being a good steward. And as you mentioned, Mark, this was probably our closing comment, but I needed to make a couple of comments about the availability of my book.
Was definitely going to have to ask you about that for sure, so please do tell us.
Well, number one, it's available online through the QDMA. Just go to our website, QDMA.com, go to the store, to books, and you can order it that way. You can call our toll-free number at our headquarters in Georgia, and that's 800-209-3337. The other way is to order it from Amazon. Just go to Amazon.com, type in Firepot Stories, and you can order it that way. The third way is to get it directly from me, and if you choose to take that route, I can personalize it. I can sign it to you or to someone you want to gift the book to. You just need to contact me through my email, which is jhamilton@qdma.com. I'll be glad to put it in the mail to you. With it signed to you, I'll put my name on it and a date. So those are the three ways.
Terrific.
I really thank you for this opportunity. It's always good to talk with fellow deer hunters, locally and far away. I wish I could maintain eye contact while we were talking, but that'll have to happen in the future.
Yes, absolutely. It's always great to hear from you, Joe, and I'd like to thank you as well. Definitely appreciate your time sharing these stories and experiences with us. And I think it's evidence simply from this conversation, anyone hearing this, that what you have to say and that what you've put down on paper is worth taking a look at, hearing about, and reading. So definitely recommend everyone check out the book. And Joe, thank you, and best of luck with the rest of your season chasing those denizens of the darkness.
Thanks, Mark, and I just want all the listeners to know that the Quality Deer Management Association is an organization that started almost 30 years ago. In fact, 2018 is our 30th anniversary. The bottom line is we are an organization for all deer hunters. That's our bottom line. We're looking out for you. Your future is our future. So if you're not a member, become one, and I think it'll be a decision that you'll be happy you made. So, Mark, thanks again for your time, and I look forward to seeing you soon enough.
Sounds great, Joe. Thank you. And that's going to wrap it up for us here today. A couple usual reminders. If you haven't yet, we certainly would appreciate it if you could leave a rating or review for this podcast on iTunes. It just takes a minute or less. If you could, give us a star rating, whatever you think we deserve. Give us some feedback. That's something that we can use to try to make this podcast better in the future. So we'd love to see what you think. Also, make sure that you're following Wired to Hunt across all of our different platforms. This Wired to Hunt isn't just a podcast. I also run a website. We've got a lot of things going on Facebook and Instagram and videos on YouTube. So make sure you're following Wired to Hunt across all those different places. And then I guess finally, we do want to thank our partners who help make this podcast possible. So big thank you to Sitka Gear, Yeti Coolers, Matthews Archery, Maven Optics, the Whitetail Institute of North America, Trophy Ridge, and Huntera Maps. And finally, most importantly, thank you to everyone out there listening. Appreciate your support. I appreciate you being a part of this community, and hopefully you are still hitting the woods hard, trying to fill some final tags of the season. And assuming you are, I wish you all the luck in the world, and until next time, stay wired to hunt.
I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. You ever get that feeling the walls closing in, the concrete jungle suffocating you? You crave some wide open spaces, the chance to connect with nature, maybe in a spot all your own. Well, head over to land.com. They've got ranches, forests, mountains, streams, you name it. Search by acreage. You can search by location. You can search by the kind of hunting and fishing you're dreaming of. Land.com. It is where the adventure begins.